Hi, this is Andrew Cuneo with another Historic Deck Tech. This time it's going to be Tainted Pact. Before we dive into the details of this build of Tainted Pact, kind of a brief history of Historic. So when Tainted Pact was released in Strixhaven's Mystical Archives, it pretty quickly became just the absolute best deck in Historic when comboed with the card Thassa's Oracle. So the way that the combo works is you use Tainted Pact in a deck which is almost entirely singletons. So when you cast it, you have the option of just exiling your entire deck. Obviously, if you have more than one copy of a card in your deck with Tainted Pact, you're eventually going to hit the second copy and then the spell will stop. So you need to have basically a singleton deck. You can have 2 copies of Tainted Pact because when you're casting one Tainted Pact, obviously there's only going to be at most one left in your deck. And then the way most people play is you also just have 2 copies of whatever your win condition is, because playing one Tainted Pact to go and find your win condition isn't going to do anything if your win condition relies on your library being empty. So you wait until you draw the 1 copy of the win condition, and then you can Tainted Pact to get rid of your library and win. So when this first came out and it was super dominant, it was in combination with the card Thassa's Oracle, which is a way to win when your library is empty. That combo was so powerful that it got Thassa's Oracle banned in Historic. But there's still another way to do it. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, does basically the same thing. The big difference being it costs 4 mana instead of 2. Another important difference being Jace has to stay in play in order for you to win, whereas Thassa's Oracle, even if your opponent could kill Thassa's Oracle, you would still win. So this Jace the combo is a little bit more vulnerable. It's more expensive. That is, in general, why the deck went from being the best deck in Historic to a deck that's not widely played. I think there's a couple of reasons that it could be a good deck again, which I'll get into. But before I do that, I want to go over a little bit of kind of the general concept of how the deck changes when you change from Thassa's Oracle to Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. In the past, the deck used Lurrus as a companion because its win condition only costs 2, which meant that you could not play more expensive cards like Narset or Shark Typhoon. So you had to really be a dedicated combo deck. With Jace being the win condition, you don't have those deck building restrictions from Lurrus, so you can play, some of the better cards that Lurrus prevents you from playing, namely Narset and Shark Typhoon. Also, with Thassa's Oracle, the way the combo worked, you had to save the Thassa's Oracle until the turn you were going to win. It just wasn't useful to just put a random 1/3 into play in Historic as a blocker. That just wasn't a very good use of a card. So you would always just hold the Thassa's Oracle until you were going to win, unless you were just literally going to die if you didn't play it. Jace can just sit in play and gain benefits from you, or gain benefits for you until the point when you win with Tainted Pact. So it's just a more generally useful card, even though it's a less explosive way to win. So that allows you to play more like a control deck and less like a combo deck, although you're a singleton control deck with a combo kill at this point, as opposed to just being more of a dedicated control deck. So some of the reasons I think the deck could be viable now, whereas it wasn't right after the banning of Thassa's Oracle. One, there's been a couple cards banned in Historic, so the overall power level of Historic has come down a little bit. One of the cards that was banned was Time Warp, because people were using Indomitable Creativity to put Velomachus into play, which they would then use to hit Time Warps and take all the turns. When that deck was popular, that meant that Fry was a very popular sideboard card. And Fry being popular meant that Jace was vulnerable. So there's not that much Fry anymore. There are Unholy Heats, which can kill Jace if they have Delirium. So that's a little bit of you gained on one side but lost on the other. But the other big difference is Brainstorm is banned. So this deck used to play 1 copy of Brainstorm, and it was obviously good, but there are other extremely good blue decks that used 4 brainstorms. And so just blue decks in general, a little bit weaker, which makes some space for this deck to be played. But also when 4 brainstorms were played, that made Narset a very popular card because Narset was one of the best ways to fight Brainstorm. Now that Brainstorm is less prevalent, Narset is less prevalent, which is important because in order for Jace to win right away, you have to be able to draw a card on your turn. So it could be awkward to combo kill through a Narset using this Jace. It wasn't impossible because you could do it over multiple turns, or you could do it with a cycling card or draw effect on your opponent's turn. But it did, just a Narset being in play would turn some potential wins into losses. So that's 2 areas where I think this deck has a little bit more room to succeed. Also, just Historic has just become kind of a more diverse metagame. There's more creature decks. There seems to be maybe more mid-range decks because the blue decks have gotten a little bit worse. And I think this deck can be good in that kind of a metagame. So now I'm going to go over some of the individual card choices. I'm probably not going to go over every single one because it's a singleton deck and that would take forever. But maybe some of the important things. First of all, mana base. There's 24 regular lands and there's 1 dual face land, so 25 total. If you go through a bunch of the other spells, there's a lot of cantrips and cycling cards, so 25 is probably a good number. Because the deck needs to be singleton, there's only 4 basic lands. There's a swamp, a snow-covered swamp, snow-covered island, and an island. You can't play more basic islands than that or more basic swamps because then your Tainted Pact no longer functions. So then there's lots of singletons. So you have the good dual lands like Watery Grave and the blue-black pathway, the Clearwater pathway. But there's also some weird cards like there's a red-black pathway in this deck. This deck has no use for red mana. There's a black pathway just because it functions like a swamp. There have been, since the last time this deck was played, they've printed a couple of additional lands. Hall of Storm Giants, and where is it? The new blue-black land, Shipwreck Marsh, which means that there are no longer off-color shock lands. It used to be the case that I would play like an Overgrown Tomb and a Hollowed Fountain in my deck, but I believe those are all out of the deck now. There are a couple of pretty awkward lands, like you would not put Ice Tunnel in a Historic deck normally, but you have to do it because of the singleton requirement. Same thing with Temple of Deceit, and I think there's a Dismal Backwater. But other than that, it's kind of the usual suspects of lands. You just need to make sure your deck's a singleton deck, so don't play more than 1 of each basic land. Then we've got Opt and Consider. Consider's another nice new addition to this deck, kind of a replacement for Brainstorm. There's also Otherworldly Gaze, which is a card I think is actually pretty powerful in Historic in combo decks. I've tried it in a bunch of decks, and it's certainly not bad. It's probably not great either, but it's pretty good in a deck like this where you're trying to dig for cards. Then there's some discard, Fatal Push, Bloodchief's Thirst, just good disruption. There's Cling to Dust, which is a card I think is kind of criminally underplayed in Historic because pretty much every deck is trying to use the graveyard, and Cling to Dust is just a really great rate for fighting the graveyard. There's a Pact of Negation, which is a way to protect your Jace the turn you're winning, and also you can just use it in general, but that's the best use for it, I would say. Then here, some more discard cards, some counters. One card, there's a Wishclaw Talisman, which is the only kind of inefficient tutor I play to... Let's see if we can get back at. It's the only inefficient tutor I have in my deck that allows me to assemble the combo. In the past, people would play Grim Tutor, which is a really expensive way to tutor for a card, and they would also play Solve the Equation. I don't like either of those cards. I think that they're just too expensive. I didn't even play them in the Thassa's Oracle version of the deck, usually. This deck, you're comfortable playing a control game, so it's not necessary to combo as fast as possible. So I don't think those are good cards. Wishclaw Talisman is good enough, but it's still not great. Then there is a Narset and a Commit, so you can do that combo to gain an advantage. Archmage's Charm. The mana base is a little bit iffy for playing Archmage's Charm, but it is a one of, and you need triple blue for Jace. So as the game progresses, you're going to want to get at least 3 blue sources of mana into play anyway. I have 1 copy of Memory Leak, which is a somewhat unusual card to include. It's, a way to clear the way for your combo. It's also a cycling card to just make your deck smaller, which is important because you're trying to assemble a 2-card combo and you only have 2 copies of each card in your deck. But then one kind of subtle thing that's important about this is when you're trying to win with Jace by getting an empty library and then drawing a card, it's important to have instant speed ways to draw a card. So in response to an Unholy Heat that would be killing the Jace, you can cycle Memory Leak and generate a new draw. So you're going to win at instant speed in response to a card that's killing your Jace. So there's Memory Leak that cycles, there's a Censor that cycles, there's some lands that cycle. Cling to Dust allows you to draw at instant speed, opt and consider it. There's lots of ways to draw at instant speed. A little bit of removal. My main deck, I only have 1 sweeper, which is Languish. I think if you want to make this deck better in Game 1 against creature decks, you might want to move the Miscast to the sideboard and play another sweeper. I'd recommend Shadow's Verdict that's in the sideboard, which we'll get to in a second. But this main deck is very much configured to be good against the other blue decks because I think that's where the format is right now. I think that the really aggressive creature decks are going to give this build a problem in Game 1, but as you can, when we get to the sideboard, you'll see there's a lot of cards to bring in. So you can pick up a lot of ground in that matchup in that style of matchup through sideboarding. There's a Shark Typhoon, which gives you an alternate way to win if, for whatever reason, the Jace isn't going to work, or this just happens to be what you draw. It's just generally a good card in Historic. Onto the sideboard. So again, we need to maintain the singleton nature of the deck so there's not duplicates in the sideboard. Occasionally people would play a 3rd Tainted Pact in the sideboard of their deck, and they were doing that because they had Fae of Wishes in their main deck. I don't have Fae of Wishes in my main deck, so I don't have a 3rd Tainted Pact in the sideboard. I just thought Fae of Wishes was too inefficient again. So the sideboard kind of breaks down into 2 categories: cards that are good against creature decks and cards that are good against blue decks. So the cards that are good against creature decks would be, Disfigure and Innocent Blood, which I think a lot of people might not realize Innocent Blood is legal in Historic. It's a really powerful card if you're not playing creatures and you're playing black. It's just a 1-mana removal spell. It's perhaps not as, well, it's not as good as Fatal Push, I would say, but you can only play 1 Fatal Push, so we have the 2nd best cards. I have a Disfigure. Maybe this should be a Davriel's Withering, but I haven't really thought fully over the implications of that. Then a Legion's End and a Moment of Craving. I like Legion's End a lot against Core Spirit Dancer style decks. And the Moment of Craving is at its best against people who are playing Burning Tree Emissary because they're always trying to kill you fast, so the life gain matters. Power Word Kill is, I think, the best just black kill spell in Historic, because the non-angel, non-demon, non-devil, non-dragon clause doesn't really come up that much. Then Yahenni's Expertise and Shadow's Verdict are, I think, the 2 next best sweepers. You might prefer an Extinction Event, but these are the ones I've chosen. So that's the anti-creature package. You're going to bring that in creature matchups, obviously, so you'll be looking to cut cards like Miscast, Duress, Spell Pierce, Negate. Usually I cut Pact of Negation against the really heavy creature decks because they don't have that many cards you really care about countering. And then maybe shave Mystical Dispute and like Narset or Commit. would be the cards you'd be looking to cut. You can also bring in God Eternal Kefnet, which is kind of a flex card, depending on how it's going to size against your opponent's stuff. This is kind of one of my pet cards in Historic. I think it really struggled during its time in Standard because it was so bad against the 3-mana Teferi. But the 3-mana Teferi is banned in Historic. So I think that there are lots of matchups where this is just a great card. If your opponent's not very good at killing it, and it works well as a blocker, I think it can be really strong in those sort of matchups. Other sideboard stuff, we've got Cage and Lantern for more graveyard hate. Ether Gust, just great Historic sideboard card. And then a couple of sideboard cards for blue matchups. Malevolent Hermit, Siphon Insight, Brazen Borrower, mostly because it's good against Shark Typhoon, but it can also pressure Narsets. And then Thought Distortions, obviously, can just be a one card win the game practically. So that's the deck. I think that it's pretty well positioned in Historic right now. It's definitely not on people's radar, but it is a very powerful combo deck. And the card quality in this deck is very high. Even though it's a singleton deck, you're not playing very many cards where you're like, I really don't like this card. It's a blue-black control deck that's filled with good cards across the board and a pretty powerful combo. So that's the deck, and I'll get into some gameplay, what you see in action. This is a perfectly fine hand. Your best hands are going to have at least one of the two combo pieces in them to start. But this hand does not, so I'm going to have to play a more controlling game as I try to find those cards. This is probably some sort of red-blue Phoenix deck, would be my guess. Might actually want access to negate on their turn, so I'm going to shock myself rather than play the Ice Tunnel. Alright, so they're like a Torrential Deerhawk Mizzix's Mastery deck, so I'm definitely happy that I shocked myself to potentially negate a Mizzix's Mastery. I'll negate the Expressive Iteration as well. They're already sort of down a card because they cycled, or well, they didn't cycle, they discarded the Opus, so I'll put them down another card. Indomitable Creativity. Don't want them to do that. And they have black-red, they have black mana in the deck. This is an unusual build of this deck. I'm not sure exactly what they're creativitying for. It looks like it's probably not Sarah's Emissary. We'll have to see. I don't have an answer to the Den of the Bugbear. If they animate it and go to attack, I'm just going to steal the shark. I think they probably won't want to trade their land for the shark. Yeah. And I drew an answer. This deck has a Field of Ruin and a Fabled Passage in it, and it only has 4 basic lands. So in longer games, you do need to be a little bit careful that you actually have a basic. I think I want to draw that. So I'll take the action of declining to put it in the graveyard. Arena is exceptionally confusing how those things work. It's a little scary now. Because they decide to go for creativity, it's going to work. As we can see, this deck is not, it's not playing like a combo deck at all. I'm basically just a control deck. No. I think that probably the way their deck is constructed, their creativity targets are torrential gearhulks. Maybe that's wrong. It'll be a little bit of surprise to me when I see what they get. So I'm going to draw in response to that. The rest is a good draw, at least. I'm going to go ahead and Fatal Push the token, even though I could, in theory, kill it with Languish. I think I don't want to be spending 4 mana on Languish, given that I've got other good stuff to do with my mana. I'm going to wait to see what they do on their turn. If they try to creativity their treasure, I might Otherworldly Gaze just to see if I can hit a way to counter it. I have a couple counters left in my deck. I have Pact of Negation. I have Mystical Dispute, Drown in the Lock. Stop in my upkeep. I don't have enough mana to play Magma Opus. I've been holding on to the Shark Typhoon because I wanted to make it pretty sizable, and I didn't really want to give them an opening where they could Prismari Command and destroy the Maze Mind Tome while it still had so many counters on it. I think they're going to have to go for creativity at this point, which I will Pact of Negation. The question is, should I make a 3/3 Shark then? Should I just play Otherworldly Gaze? Ooh, the Hall of Storm Giants is large. I used my Fatal Push and my Field of Ruin. Still have a Drown in the Lock that can answer it. I have a Hull of my own. I can win before it kills me. It's not game over, but it's not good news. So I'm one land off of being able to make a 7/7 shark. So I will hold the Shark Typhoon for now. If they choose to attack me here, I think I'll make a 1/1 and just chump. They didn't attack me. Now I can make a 7/7 and trade. These are treasures, right? Yeah, the opponent could have just shocked this in and attacked. I think I would have done that if I were them. They don't have that many Indomitable Creativities left in their deck that they need to keep live. One card I don't have in my deck is Memory Deluge. I think Beholding Multiverse is just a better card in Historic. Maybe I'm wrong. It's obviously going to depend somewhat on what your deck is and what matchup you're preparing for. This is some form of Indomitable Creativity deck. I still would say I'm not really sure what it is they're creativitying for. Ether Gust can always hit it at a minimum creativity, though. So these are all the cards that I think are, I guess Lantern is good as well against Mastery. So what cards don't I like? Languish is quite bad. This is Blood Chief's Thirst, Fatal Push. I think I'll cut Otherworldly Gaze. This is a matchup where I want to be more controlling. I did have Shark Typhoon. So I don't want to, maybe I don't want to cut every single removal spell. Maybe Fatal Push is good enough. But what would I cut instead? Maybe I don't need the Kefnet. I think I'll cut the Talisman. Thought Erasure. Maybe do that. The Talisman in particular is pretty bad against Prismari Command. One of the things the Talisman has going for it is you can spend 2 mana and just have it sitting in play, so that the turn that you're ready to combo, it's effectively a tutor for 1 mana. But obviously that doesn't work if it can just be destroyed by Prismari Command. This is one of my favorite cards from Innistrad. It might not be a good idea to have it in the sideboard, but I just think it leads to very fun games, so I'm playing it. I can gust something on top of their deck and then Siphon Insight to steal it from them if it's something I really want. They had Fatal Push, I think. It was the only black card I saw in the first game. Presumably they will have boarded in some amount of discard. I don't think I want to tap 3 mana to try to memory leak them on my turn, so I'm just going to bottom that. Just going to play a tap land this turn. I don't really want to tap all my mana for Narset when I have 2 answers to Indomitable Creativity. And I don't think they're going to play a 2 mana card and have Censor up, so I don't think there's a need to have an untapped land that turn. Let's see if we can get some more intelligence about what their deck is. They have Steam Vents in it, and it's not that good of intelligence. I guess Steam Vents is better than a black land. Oh, man. Drown in the Loch is a answer to the Hall of Storm Giants, which is not a problem quite yet, but maybe as the game goes on, it could be a problem. I could Gust that and then Siphon it. Seems maybe it's probably worth doing. Oh, I was going to come into play untapped. That's pretty bad. I don't feel comfortable playing the Siphon now. Before I could play the Siphon and have Drown in the Lockup. I have a lot of lands in play to not have a basic swamp, but that's the way this deck works. With all the oddball lands. I obviously should have just played Watery Grave. I think I will Spell Pierce the Prismari command. Allowing them to make a treasure both gives them a target they can sack to creativity, and also it just gives them a mana that they could potentially use to pay for a Spell Pierce. Need some more insights into what you're trying to do over here, opponent. They have 4 cards in hand. Nothing that great in their graveyard. One of the problems with taking the Go blank is it really makes the Drown in the Loch not very effective. So I guess I'm going to take Expressive Iteration. Let's see what they're trying to accomplish over here. Inquisition of Kozilek is a card I thought was almost unplayable in Historic before Brainstorm was banned because it would whiff so often against Brainstorm decks. They cast Brainstorm in response. They're casting Pact of Negation? What in the world? Alright. They'll be taking their next turn off.
My prowess is unmatched with thoughtfulness before action.
Maybe this deck is trying to get Niv Mizzet? But you would think that then they would have Lotus Fields and Stifles. I don't really understand what my opponent's deck is trying to be exactly.
Hone your prowess.
Censor that they know about. It's not the best kind of censor. That is an extremely good card to find. So now I'll probably be able to stop what they're trying to do on their turn and then win on my turn with this amount of counter magic. Suppose they're trying to get rid of Narset. No, they're going after me. Okay. So you can do this where you play the Tainted Pact at the end of your opponent's turn, and then you untap and play Jace to win. Obviously, to do that, you need to leave a couple cards in your deck. So you need one card you get from the Tainted Pact and one card you get from your draw step. So you need to have... You can't take the bottom card here. You need to take at least one above the bottom. If you want, you can take one a little bit earlier than that and still win. If it's a particular card that you think might actually be useful to combo. They didn't know that I had the win, but I think that they were giving me credit. This hand's a keep, I think, because I can cast Otherworldly Gaze and just find my next couple lands that I need. Also, I have both cards of the combo here. So if I am able to find my land drops and make land drops, I should win pretty quickly. Question is, do I even want to draw the black land? Doesn't really help me do anything. Like I need to draw a blue land to win. This appears to be an Enchantress deck. Which I think their deck is not at all well suited, at least in the main deck, to stop me from winning the way my deck works. You might be tempted to try to use Tainted Pact to go and find the blue land, but then unless there's a blue land in kind of my bottom 3 cards, I wouldn't be able to win the game, so that wouldn't be a very good idea. Maybe should have paid Otherworldly Gaze in my upkeep. It's probably not going to matter. As long as I hit a blue land, I can play a blue land. Next turn, play a Mind Stone. End of opponent's turn, Tainted Pact, untap and win. They do have the ability to sack the Sterling Grove to tutor for something that might do something, but I'm not sure that this deck is going to be built with cards in it that actually stop me from what I'm trying to do. So there's the blue land I needed. And barring something very unexpected, that should be enough to win. When this deck was good before, Tainted Pact didn't give you enough time on the rope to always resolve it. So it was a bit harder to win like this. Now it correctly allows you enough time to resolve the card, so you don't have to rush. Which, there's not really any decisions to be made here. It's just get rid of my deck. It's just a matter of making sure I don't misclick. And also making sure that I leave enough cards in my deck to not deck myself before I get this Jason to play. So what do I think that the opponent might be bringing in? Probably cards like Gideon's Intervention would be my guess. It's probably the scariest sort of thing they might have. Somewhat interestingly, Innocent Blood can kill their enchantresses through Sterling Grove. I don't know that that's really that important, but it is something that can happen. I think Baleful Mastery is clearly not very good. Miscast is not good. I think Mystical Dispute's not good. I think I like the discard cards. I like having a little bit of stuff so I can kill the creature Enchantress or the Sanctum Weaver. Blood Chief's Thirst is probably going to be worse than Disfigure for me. The Thirst can kill the Destiny Spinner, so maybe that makes it better. This being an instant means that occasionally I'll save a mana. I think I like all these cards I have, so what else should I be adding to my deck? Ether Gust seems fine. Maybe I just want the God Eternal Kefnet because it could win through Gideon's Intervention. I expect that my opponent's going to board out their Solemnity 9 Lives combo because it doesn't do anything against my main combo, so it will be possible for me to just win with creatures. Obviously, in order for that to happen, I'm going to have a lot of control of the game. But my deck's capable of doing that. Certainly a solid hand here. Not nearly as explosive as my hand the first game. I'm gonna Ether Gust this in the draw step so that they don't have the option of immediately recasting it. Oh, bottom. Interesting. I think I'm gonna want to just cycle. This is one of those spots where Drown in the Loch is a little bit awkward. It's a good card all around, but this deck does not really enable it in any way. This is another card I think is just better than Memory Deluge. They might be able to go for a play right now where they sack the Sterling Grove and then play another enchantment and immediately draw into some, like a Gideon's Intervention type card. It's a little bit scary. I'm going to see what happens with the rest of their turn, but I might, and then I'll probably play his Illumination and then maybe try to pact and hit a Languish if I don't find something better, or if I don't find Jace. I guess Jace being the thing that would be better. Could have drawn in the land. I guess. So in a spot like this, where I'm playing Tainted Pact, I'm not guaranteed to be able to get Languish because I have 2 Jaces in my deck. Once I hit a Jace, if I decide to keep going, which I'm going to, I can now fizzle or hit a second Jace and not be able to win. Also, I hit my other Tainted Pact, which means I'm not going to be able to empty my deck. But I'm down to 19 cards, so I'll have to just get through my deck the hard way. I have 1 Jace left in my deck. And 18 other cards I wish weren't there. I wonder if they went AFK when I started playing the Tainted Pact, just assuming I was going to kill them. Wait, why can't I? Oh, this has Shroud. All right. Guess I needed to counter that. Sure. That's perfectly fine. I don't think the talisman was actually going to be able to find me anything good anyway. This is much less good. I think I should have more sweepers in my deck that can kill that Destiny Spinner. Pretty awkward lands this hand, but reasonable spells. Spell Pierce in particular is, I think, quite good in this matchup. Should I lead on the Castle or the Drowned Catacomb? The Drowned Catacomb is more likely to come into play untapped later on, because I could draw one of my swamps. There's only 2 swamps that would affect that. I don't have any reason to really want black mana all that early, but I think it's just not, like, I think the upside of drawing into a swamp is really pretty low. And maybe I draw Thoughtseize or something next turn. I'm going to leave Spell Pierce up because of Enchantress's presence. My control plan is much more effective if I keep the Enchantresses under control. Hope their turns just turn one of my lands into a 2/2. I do have the option of using the Brazen Borrower on the Sterling Grove and then using Memory Leak to take it out of their hand. And that would allow me to play Drown in the Loch on Destiny Spinner. I don't know that I'm at that level of desperation, but maybe it'll be necessary at some point. All right, now I have a different option that, in response to them casting an enchantment, I can now Brazen Borrower the Destiny Spinner and counter it, which is, I think, what I will do here. I don't think I'm going to cast the Memory Leak on their last card in hand, so I'm just going to cycle this. And do I want to scry? I don't think I need to. I can now animate this to block. I have the option of either using the Castle Vantress or cycling the Fetid Pools and playing Consider. I'm going to choose to cycle and play Consider just because cycling Fetid Pools is fairly mana intensive. Probably they're going to get something I can Ether Gust, and I'll Ether Gust it and then Field of Ruin it away. I think if I had played the Field of Ruin, they just wouldn't have sacked the Sterling Grove. As you can see, by keeping the Enchantresses off the deck, or off the battlefield, that their deck doesn't really do a whole lot. I'm a long-time Enchantress player in a lot of different formats. I've had this happen to me quite a lot. It's not particularly practical to think that I'm going to win the game by attacking with the Hall of Storm Giants when there's a Destiny Spinner in play, because I can always just spend effectively 5 mana to chump block it with a land. Now that I've used up all the counters on the Maze Mind Toner, and I'm not going to be spending 2 mana on that a turn, I think I'm going to use the Castle Vantress because I'll have 2 mana for the Omen of the Sea next turn. Do I want either of these? Yes, I'm going to play Henny's Expertise and get the Destiny Spinner off the board. And then play Narset. That'll mean that my Negate can hit some of their more problematic cards again. And it also means that the Narset will get to live, which having a Narset in play against the Enchantress deck is pretty good. And then I've got the Opt, so I'm guaranteed to hit an Opt at worst. That's a good card, but not a good card against an Narset. Alright, so that was that deck in action. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a comment in the leave a comment, I guess, if you enjoyed it, or if you have some idea about some other deck you want to see, or if you want to tell me about the ways I messed up, which this is a pretty hard deck to play flawlessly, so I wouldn't be surprised if I messed up. But thanks to everybody who made it this far, and like and subscribe it if you want to see more content like this.